Coming up next on the Jeff Crilley Show, 21 years ago, she lost her husband to an antidepressant-induced suicide. It changed the trajectory of her life. She's now on a mission to educate people about Big Pharma. Her journey just ahead.
Many are predicting that the worst is yet to come, which is unfortunate, said one person here. Until now, they've enjoyed the reputation of being the nation's icebox.
Watched a burglar in his home this morning by webcam.
As a journalist of over 25 years, stories are what make my world turn.
Reporting live from the Dallas newsroom tonight, Jeff Crilley, Fox 4 News.
But in 2008, I took the jump from my familiar life and started a PR firm from my home.
We're talking about anyone with a camcorder like the one I'm using becomes a television network.
We started slowly growing the company, and we now have over 100 clients, and we've branched into the world of live digital broadcasting. I now own 8 different TV studios and have a huge team, and the stories that I now get to share are sometimes the most important of my life. Life has a funny way of coming around full circle. This is the Jeff Crilley Show.
Well, if anything good came from the pandemic is everybody kind of woke up to Big Pharma and that a pill doesn't answer all problems on the planet. And there's a healthy skepticism that's out there, especially when the government's trying to push a pill or a shot on you. And I think that's healthy for all of us to ask questions. My next guest, unfortunately, lost her husband 21 years ago, and she's going to tell her story to us right now. Kim Witczak is in the studio. She's a global drug safety advocate. Thanks for coming on the show.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So why don't you take us back 21 years ago?
Sure. Well, 21 years ago, my life looked very different than it does today. I was happily married, traveling the world, about to have a family, and I got a call one day on August 6, 2003 from my dad, who called to tell me that my husband, Woody, of almost 10 years, was found hanging from the rafters of our garage, dead at age 37. Woody had no history of depression. He had no history of any mental health issues. He had just started his dream job with a startup company and was having trouble sleeping. And he did like a lot of us do, which is, he went to the doctor and because he was a big athlete and they fixed him, right? Surgery, they fixed him. And so he said he was having trouble sleeping, and the doctor sent him home with a 3-week sample pack of Zoloft, which is an antidepressant, and said it would take the edge off and help him sleep. Well, I happened to be out of the country on a shoot. I'm in advertising production, and I was down in New Zealand those first 3 weeks that he was on the drug, so I didn't see what was happening to him. And when I got back, I'll never forget something that will stick with me till the day I die, which was I was excited to see Woody. He walked in the back door, and he fell to the floor, completely drenched through his blue dress shirt, fell into a fetal position with his hands around his head like a vice. "Kim, you gotta help me. My head's outside my body. You gotta help me." And he's rocking back and forth. And I remember looking at him, and we calmed him down. He called the doctor, and the doctor said, "You gotta give it 4 to 6 weeks for the drug to kick in." Every night the next week, Woody came home saying, "I gotta beat this feeling in my head." So when I left to go out of town again for work, my busy time of season, I didn't have a clue that would be the last time I would ever see my husband alive. And the night that my life fell apart, I'll never forget, there was a coroner that came to our house. And the coroner asked if Woody was on any medication. And the only medication he was taking was Zoloft, which is an antidepressant. And she said she's going to take it with her. It might have something to do with his death. And the other thing, ironically, that same day that Woody was found was the front page of our newspaper, the Star Tribune, had an article that said the UK finds link between antidepressants and suicide in teens. This was in 2003. And so in that second, my whole life came crashing down. But something intuitively didn't make sense. How did Woody, this guy who loved life, take his own life? He went from not being able to sleep to head outside the body to hanging in 5 short weeks. And so that really became the journey, and it started investigating what we eventually found out that the FDA held hearings in 1991 when it was just Prozac on the market and it was about the emergence of violence and suicide. At that time, the committee, all of them said there was no history, there was no link to the drug, and they all took money from pharma. And fast forward, the FDA did not put a warning on. That was in '91. Fast forward, now you have all the new antidepressants. You have Zoloft on the market, Paxil, and you're giving it to kids, and there was no warning. So that became my mission and my brother-in-law and my mission to get warnings, because if just one life was saved, then, you know, and so that was really what I started out as. You know, we eventually got warnings. I had a big wrongful death, failure to warn lawsuit against Pfizer, and I told my story many times at the FDA, members of Congress, anything. And you know, originally I thought it was just an issue with antidepressants, but in reality, it was the whole drug safety system.
Yes.
And that was those years ago.
We're going to show some pictures of your late husband, and as we look at these pictures, how long did it take you after his death to go on this crusade?
Probably within a month or so after. It was, you know, it was part of my healing journey, but it literally became, because this guy, it made no sense. And then I kept thinking, if somebody in '91 did that job, I wouldn't be here. So I needed to do something.
Sure.
And it helped with the grieving and all of that.
Well, I know there's documentaries out there. If you go to YouTube, you can find many of these documentaries about how pretty much Big Pharma owns everything. Even in medical school these days, doctors are not learning anything other than how to prescribe a pill. Mm-hmm. So do you see this as something that can be reversed, this slippery slope that we're on?
Yeah, it's funny. So now I call it selling sickness. So ironically, I have spent my entire career in advertising and marketing. And so when I start looking at the business, and I call it, I've created now a spider web, and it's all the influences of Big Pharma in medical schools. We're one of only 2 countries in the world that allow drug ads. It is the FDA, it's CDC, it is lobbying, it is mind-blowing, all of the business of Big Pharma.
Yes.
And you know, today I sit on the FDA Psychopharmacologic Drugs Advisory Committee, the one that in 1991 didn't do their job as the consumer rep. So I see how drugs are coming onto market, and it's really all about, it's about getting the drug on the market. I mean, that's why the FDA is there. It's kind of like, it's the first stop to,
yes.
You know, your product being on market.
And you are a familiar voice on Capitol Hill. We're going to show a little bit of video of you testifying. And I think this one, this particular clip, this is you dealing with COVID. So does that feel empowering to be able to actually have the ear of lawmakers?
You know, yeah, so this one's really interesting. So when COVID came, I don't have kids, so vaccines, I didn't really pay attention. But when I looked at what happened at COVID, you gave these companies, Pfizer, one of the ones that has paid more money in fines than any other company, you gave them complete legal immunity. So I'm like, you know what? That was like a red flag that went up in my mind. So that became, we're going to be on Congress. We're going to speak, and we're going to tell the story and get them at least. But you know, the reality is Big Pharma has a lot of money, connections to lobbyists and Congress.
Doctors were ostracized for even, you know, prescribing vitamin D, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, I was just horrified at the way that, you know, this whole thing played out. What are some lessons learned from COVID?
Well, for starters, we need to be able to have debate. And so the fact that, you know, we all know, or at least in science class when we were young, that that's how you test theories, is you got to keep throwing questions out to people. And so the fact that we had no question. But I think the biggest thing I would say is no one's going to ever care about your health more than, and your loved one's health more than you will. The government is not going to be your savior. The doctors are not your savior. And so it's really about doing your research And if something intuitively doesn't feel right, you should not have to be mandated to take a product and put something into your body, which is what we saw during COVID.
Sure. We've got some video of you speaking because you're a very popular speaker, and I like the title of your speech. Share it with us again.
Oh, sure. It's how an accidental advocate discovered America's broken drug safety system.
And tell us about the kinds of groups you like to speak to.
Well, I love to speak to doctors because, and in med schools when I get invited, because I think there's a lot of things that they don't necessarily understand because they want to do the right thing, right? But they don't necessarily understand the influences of big pharma. So med schools, I speak to public health, I speak to general public. I also speak to drug companies because, people like Woody and the people who are harmed, they're considered acceptable collateral damage or the cost of doing business. But these are somebody's love, somebody's husband, somebody's child. That these are not just a number in a clinical trial.
Well, I'm afraid that so many Americans are taking kind of a deadly cocktail. So they can't sleep, so they take this. And so then they take something to wake up and give them some energy. And maybe they're also self-medicating with booze or marijuana. And you're putting just a deadly cocktail in your body, aren't you?
Yeah, it's funny. It's, Americans take more drugs. We're 5% of the world's population, and we take 75% of all medications. And so this idea of a quick fix, which it's way easier. The one I'm really concerned with right now is even the Ozempic. The reinsurance companies are already telling people to put a lot of money because they know there's lawsuits coming. And so, I think we have to really think twice. And I get when you hurt and something doesn't make sense, you're like, just give me something. I've even done it when I've had a flu.
Right, sure.
Give me an antibiotic without
Right.
even thinking, because
Right.
I just want to be back to being normal. But we really do need to slow down because a lot of the drugs that we take, they'll have a side effect that then causes another side effect. And then soon you start realizing it's a cascading effect of how many medications we're taking.
Right, and I come back to, if you're a believer and the baby is born healthy, this is, God had the perfect blueprint for the body, and the body can heal itself. There's all kinds of mechanisms inside the body to heal itself, but then you start messing up the blueprint by adding this or adding that. Speak a little bit about how kind of we're messing up God's plan.
Yeah, well, one of the things that I learned during COVID was just the sheer number of vaccines that we give children, right? As I mentioned earlier, I don't have kids, but there was a law that in the mid-'80s that they gave companies free immunity from lawsuits, and that's when the number of vaccines increased because the companies couldn't get sued for future harms. So that's one thing. It is the money that we spend in marketing and advertising to get more products. Even like when I look at what happened with the COVID vaccines, that we were putting things in when there were other natural, like we were telling people not to be vitamin D, not to be outside, stay inside, you can't exercise. I'm like, wait a minute, this is the body that God gave us that is perfectly designed. And there are times when there is need for medical treatments, but this idea that a pill is going to just fix all of life's problems, and especially when I look at the mental health space, that we just throw drugs at them. Look at what's happening with the vets. That's one group that I'm really concerned that we just give them cocktails of medication.
Yes.
And it's not fixing the problem.
Kim, we've got about 2 minutes left, so I want you to look into the camera on the left and go ahead and talk directly to that viewer.
So I'm going to say always do your research. Again, I will repeat, no one's going to care more about your health than you will ever care about your health. So do your research, have a healthy dose of skepticism, and see if there's another alternative before you take the pill, because everybody's balance of risk harm is different, but the harms from pills that we take are the second to third leading cause of death in the United States.
Wow. What a powerful way to end this show. We're also going to leave you with her website, which is kimwitczak.com. The great Kim Witczak. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
You bet. That's it for now. We'll see you next time.